third reading file, and we discuss this.
Please proceed.
Madam Speaker, Bill number 140-35 is an act to amend Section 1216 to Chapter 1, Title 12, Guam Code Annotated, relative to authorizing the issuance of revenue bonds of the Pt.1 International Airport Authority to refund all or a portion of its outstanding general revenue bonds from time to time. Bill 140-35 will allow the International Airport to do such that, and the beauty of by allowing them to do this, they'll be able to use the proceeds to fund and maybe obtain up to $50 million in federal grants that were allotted to improve airport infrastructures, which require a design, complete, and deemed a shovel-ready project. The proceeds from these funds are monies that will be eligible for reimbursable FAA grants, eligible for capital improvement projects, and the use of those funds will be used to design the replacement of the cargo and many other factors up at the airport. And that being said, ma'am, I'd like to also let it be recognized that on the bill on page 2, there are some technical errors. I want to make sure that my colleagues are being informed that on page 2, line 21, the word, because it's an amendment of the section from time to time should have been underlined, and or a portion of should have been underlined. That's a technical correction that can be made. I spoke already with the legal folks, and they said that that's minor. They'll just fix that. And then on line 24, correction, line 25, after the word purpose of, it should have been in parentheses, letter A, and then striked out, because as we reconstructed the paragraphs on the amendment, we created letter A, so that section A will be striked, I will be added on, which is underlined, should be underlined, and then on line 26, after the word or expansion of the airport and parentheses B, and then striked, and then the parentheses of the double I would be underlined, and that's all, ma'am. And that being said, Madam Speaker, I move to resolve to the Committee of the Whole for the purpose of deliberating and addressing matters on Bill number 140. The chair of the Committee of the Whole would be Senator Clint Rigel, who is the oversight chair of GITA, and that the panels consist of folks from GITA and folks from the airport, and they are available, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator San Augustine. Just to be clear, we are in second reading. There has been a motion to resolve into the Committee of the Whole. Are there any objections towards this motion? No objections? We'll take a 5-minute recess to bring in the panel.
Good morning. The Committee of the Whole is now in order. Each senator will have 5 minutes to ask questions about the bill. We'll have 2 rounds. We'll begin with the front row and work our way to the back row. Senators are asked to make their best efforts to not ask a question that's been asked and answered already. If a senator needs to leave the session hall, please make arrangements for your staff to follow along with the discussion until you're able to return. The chair will allow for a senator to get clarification on a previous question's answer. We will begin first with the sponsor of the measure. Senator Joe San Augustine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to reiterate that a motion to make some administrative corrections on the bill on page 2, line 21, and continues on to line 22 to underline the words "from time to time," and then also on page 22 to underline "or a portion of bonds." And then on line 25 to add letter parenthesis small letter A, and then strike it after the word "purpose of" on line 25, and then underline but change the I to number 1 in parentheses and underline that. And then on line 26, after the word "and," which is followed by or preceded by "or expansion of the airports," and add in parentheses small letter B, and then change the double I to number 2 in parentheses and underline. And those corrections were identified by legal that we need to administratively put in. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
On that motion, are there any objections? None heard, so moved. All right, let's begin now with senators on the first row, beginning with Senator Therese Terlahi. If you have any questions on the measure? They can do a presentation if you would like.
Mr.
Sure.
Chair, if I may request that
Sure.
Perhaps a presentation of what the bill is and its impact be done first, and then I know you have a rule where you start from the front to the back, but perhaps we can, if you will be amenable to revisiting that rule and to calling on the senators as they request when they have their questions, because some senators will formulate a question a little bit later than the others, if that's okay.
Sure. So we'll go ahead and begin first with the presentation from the members of the panel. Thank you.
Good morning, and Hafa Day Senators. My name is Ricky Hernandez. I'm the Deputy Administrator for the Guam Economic Development Authority. I just want to thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for being able to explain the bill in its entirety. So Bill 140 is a culmination of work that has been done by GITA in collaboration with BBMR, the Office of the Governor, and the Guam International Airport Authority. And what Bill 140 does is, what's good about Bill 140 is that it aligns with the Governor Leon Guerrero's statements made as it relates to borrowing. And what borrowing does, the borrowing that the Governor has mentioned on record in terms of approving, that she would approve, is borrowing for savings, which this bill does, and also borrowing for capital improvements, and absolutely no borrowing for operations. And so this bill actually does both borrow for savings and borrow for capital improvements. And just to get into the technical nature of the bill, what Bill 140 does is it authorizes the governor, as well as with the approval of this body, the approval of the International Airport Authority, and the approval of Guam Economic Development Authority, the ability to refund a portion of its outstanding bonds or prior bonds, as it's stated in the bill. And this change is necessary because currently in the existing law, it only allows for all the bonds to be refunded, not a portion of and that technical amendment and request will allow for the airport to refund, and this is the more important thing, for savings in excess of approximately $2.25 million over the next 5 years, or 3 to 5 years. And so that's essentially what the bill does, and I thank Senator San Augustine for those technical changes to Section 2 on page 2. And if there are any specific questions as it relates to the bill, that's what the bill does in essence, is it just allows for a portion of bonds to be refunded for savings. And so, anything else?
Before we continue, forgive me, I neglected to allow the members of the panel to begin with an introduction of themselves and what agency they're representing. So let's begin first to my left with Mr. Hernandez.
Sorry, this is Ricky Hernandez, Deputy Administrator for the Guam Economic Development Authority.
Good morning. Lester Carlson, Director, BBMR.
Good morning, Senators. I'm John Canatz. I'm the Deputy Executive Manager for the Guam Airport Authority.
Good morning, John Rios, Comptroller for the Guam International Airport.
Fred Topaz, Program Manager with Transportation Management Group, the Program Managers for the expansion of the Guam International Airport.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Carlson, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. The measure before you is very timely and very appropriate. There is a savings that is available for the airport. The market conditions are very good. The recent general obligation bond sale reinforced the appetite that investors have for triple tax exempt paper. We are the only issuers of triple tax exempt bonds that is actively in the market. Unfortunately, the other territories are not in a very positive fiscal condition right now. So when we come to the market, we are well received, and there were questions that were brought before Mr. Hernandez and I recently about upcoming issues, because the general obligation bond that we floated was, $30 million, and it's like, well, do you guys have anything else planned? Because they were just very interested in being able to acquire any Guam bonds when and if they should become available. The fiscal note that was prepared basically articulates that there are certainly the $2 million savings that Mr. Hernandez spoke of, that will occur because the legislative threshold of 2% net present value savings will certainly be met easily with these callable bonds. There is a more beneficial opportunity if the market stays where it's at. On top of the refunding of the callable bonds, if rates stay the same, there will be an opportunity to refund or restructure more of the bonds, and that will actually be more beneficial to the airport, because as the fiscal note states, at the time we're envisioning about $14 million of cash flow savings in the next couple of years, and as the author of the bill mentioned, that money would be very, very timely for the airport to apply towards matching federal grants for a number of projects that they have in a shovel-ready capacity. So the request before you today is to get your approval so that we can refund a portion of the bonds, always ensuring that the net present value savings threshold of a minimum of 2% is achieved at any juncture. And with that, I'd like to be able to see if you guys have any questions. I think we pretty much covered what it is we're here for, so.
Senator Chalahi?
Could you just put on the record the word refunding? Could you put that in other terms? Refunding of the bonds?
You want me to explain the refunding
I just
part?
think it would be helpful, yeah, for everybody.
Okay, so there's a number of the 2013 Series C bonds that are already callable. We can refund them at any time, and the net present value savings of this first objective is in the $2.5 million range, cash flow savings over the next 4 to 5 years. So that one will be achieved regardless of any market movement. So that the refunding is, a good example is if you had a 8% loan and you wanted to refinance that loan at 5%, therefore you would realize the savings. So that's the refunding aspect.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I forget, proceed with my question, just a couple. So I think you might have explained it now that, so the portion that you want immediately is to achieve savings of 2 million or approximately 2.5 million. But you may go back later for another portion. Is that to achieve this 6.4 to 7.7 million in Gita's letter?
Actually, the idea is to go out and hopefully do both at the same time.
Oh, same time. Okay.
Yes, right now the market is cooperating. If we were to go out soon, we would be able to realize this restructuring and the very beneficial cash flow savings for the airport.
Sure. So the cash flow savings, the bill doesn't talk about what it's going to be used for, but Gita's letter does say that cash flow savings to the airport may be used for leverage over $100 million in Federal Aviation Administration grant funds that will further improve airport infrastructure. And I think you also mentioned that, Mr. Crossan. So just wanted to see from the airport, what projects are these? Do you have a specific list, or these are just not planned yet?
Yes, Senator, we do have a specific list with regards to some of the projects that have already been programmed by the Federal Aviation Administration to provide grants to the Guam International Airport Authority. Beginning with the runway 6 left rehabilitation, that's going to require the rehabilitation of pavement that's more than 50 years old, some as early as that was built back in 1953 after the military took over Tizan. And so a lot of that concrete pavement has fallen into disrepair, and so we're moving forward with a full rehabilitation of that. Phase 1 is going to begin shortly within the next few months, and then Phase 2 will commence next year in fiscal year 2020. The next project that we have on the list is the apron and taxiway rehabilitation. That's where we park the aircraft. The aprons are as old as 20 years, and there's a lot of rutting, cracking, spalling, and other deficiencies on the airport pavement that needs to be repaired, and we'll be repairing it in phases as to not impact our operations at the airport. And then we are going to be constructing the air cargo apron to service the integrated air cargo facility that's located about half a mile from the actual terminal. Currently, what happens now is that we have 3 major cargo aircraft carriers that come into Guam, and they end up having to park in spots 1, 2, and 3 near the terminal. Spots 1, 2, and 3 don't have any fuel hydrant systems to provide interplane fueling into those aircraft, and so what has to happen is we either have to truck the fuel to bring it there, which is actually an unsafe practice, and many airports have been moving away from that. And so the construction of that cargo facility will enable us to extend the hydrant system down to the integrated cargo facility and allow for parking of up to 2 wide-body air cargo aircraft adjacent to the integrated air cargo facility to service those operations. And then next year, we're looking forward to proceeding with our airport master plan update. The last master plan we had completed was back in 2012. And along with that plan, we are looking at updating our airport noise compatibility study, which will include the noise exposure maps. That will allow us to proceed with the residential sound solution program that we've implemented at the airport to help mitigate the noise that's created for the residents that are located in the adjacent area to our property.
Thank you, Mr. Tupaz. So the FAA is going to give grants for all of those projects?
We've been in discussions with them. Currently, they're giving us grants for runway 6 left, 24 right, and the apron and taxiway rehabilitation. And then as part of the 2018 FAA $1 billion supplemental funding, they're looking to provide funding for the construction for the cargo aprons. And then for the airport master plan as well, we're receiving funds from them in 2020. And then for the airport noise compatibility study, that's a set aside by the FAA that's granted to airports to the tune of about $2 million.
All right, great. Thank you. And I was just, this is a kind of out of their question, but while we're talking about bonds, so we all know that when the issue of customs and their leasing of the airport facilities, that it's always been told to the legislature that it's the bonds that are restricting use, customs use of those buildings as if they're not airport related. And we all know that you have leased other parts of your buildings, right, for other purposes, such as the Social Security Administration. I think the Veterans Affairs offices are up there and other buildings. But I'm just wondering, when you refund, are you able to change terms, or are you able to include as one of the projects that are covered, to not to create one, but to maybe just improve a customs bay, the customs facilities there, so that that's then legally included as one of the airport, projects. I don't know. I'm just trying to be creative, and I guess I'm just going to ask if you could look at that again and look at it again and again and again, so that there's always, if you can try to be creative to include it as kind of an official airport project, then hopefully we don't get that. We can take care of customs that way.
Yes, ma'am. This is John Canazza, again, the Deputy Executive Manager. We are currently looking at ways to address the customs leasing space at the airport at this time. So the governor is really focusing on what we can do as far as the space lease for customs up at the airport.
All right, because we were told they were going to have to move out and use their funds to pay for leasing outside of the airport. But what I'm asking for is for the airport to reconsider including them as part of, of their projects of renovating the airport, and just settle that once and for all, so that we don't continue, because to pay for an outside lease, they are looking at increasing the fees again, right? Or you all are going to look at increasing fees for that, and I just know GBB, we're looking at every dollar possible to save for these tourists to attract them here. So I don't know. I just don't want to shoot ourselves in the foot and if you are achieving this savings and expanding and able to do all these projects, that's just my ask. I suspect you're not able to answer that right now, but I'm going to ask it again, and if you could continue to keep looking at that. You're a new administration now, and maybe you can find a creative way. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Talahi. Senator Kelly Marsh Taitano.
Hafa Adai. Good morning to everyone here. So starting with some just real basic questions to get some foundational understanding here. Has the bill been reviewed by the Council of GITA, the Airport Authority, or the Bond Council of GITA? So I know GITA and the Airport Authority have been involved, as well as BBMR, but has it been reviewed by or written by the legal counsel of any of those entities?
Yes, thanks for the question, Senator. As with all bond bills that we work on, we ensure that it goes through bond counsel's scrutiny. And so in this specific case, this bill has gone through bond counsel. It was actually written by bond counsel in collaboration with GITA Airport Authority, as well as Office of the Governor.
Sujus Masi, that's important to understand. The next is looking at information about where we are with the bond. So some of this is provided in the fiscal note, but not everybody has access to the fiscal note. So on the 3 outstanding general revenue bonds, Series A, B, and C, what are the principal amount values of where the airport is at on those different series of bonds?
Mr. Hernandez is pulling it up right now.
We'll go ahead and have a short recess while they look up that information.
Shall I, because that was some different parts, so maybe I can put in the other parts so we can look it up all
Sure,
at the same
sure.
time. So it's the principal amount value, the outstanding amount to pay off. We're talking about one in particular, but this bill opens it up to all, potentially for the future. So if we could know the outstanding amounts for the 3, the anticipated administrative costs and penalties, if there are any, and the current interest rates. Thanks.
Senator, with respect to the first question, the issuance amount for the Series C bonds, which is the series that we're going to be refunding, the original issuance was $199 million just for that series. What we're looking at for the refunding portion is refunding about $20 million of currently callable bonds. The net present value estimation is 10.5% NPV. And the estimated cost of issuance is our customary 2%.
Sujus Masi for that, but because this bill is creating a blanket approval that will potentially live on to perpetuity, if we could also get the information for the other series as well. But I can move on to a question while Mr. Hernandez is looking that up. When we're talking about
Senator,
the,
I apologize. I believe he has the answer. Mr.
great.
Hernandez does.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry for that delay. So Lester mentioned the original issuance amount. So there's 3 series that was issued in 2013, and you're asking for the current amount outstanding for each one and then the interest rate for those. I'll just start with saying what the original issuance amount was and then what it currently is based on our debt abstract. And so Series 2013A was originally issued at 14.6 million. The current outstanding for the Series A as of today, which is April, is approximately less than 8.1 million. So that's what's currently outstanding in Series A. Series B was originally issued at 33.6 million. And for Series B, the current outstanding amount is at about 24 million. And Series 2013C was originally issued at 199 million. And currently the outstanding balance for that is around 149 million. And so we are requesting to refund a portion of that Series C amount, 21 million that is callable currently. And the interest rate all in is 5.89%.
Can you please repeat the interest rate?
Yes, the interest rate is 5.89%.
Sejus Masi for that. That helps provide a much clearer picture in my mind as to what we're talking about. And when I was looking at 21.45 million, I did not realize that there was 149 million left on Series C. So if nothing else, that creates more context and a fuller understanding of that. So getting into the plan or approach to refund the outstanding amounts, or at least a portion of them. We have in the legislation in Section 1207 a revenue bond redemption fund. So this language, however, does not appear in the bill. So is it capable of paying off any of the outstanding balance at this time?
Senator, could you please, Senator Kelly Marsh-Chichino, please repeat that question?
As long as you don't count it as time. So Section 1207 provides for a revenue bond redemption fund. So I want to know if there is any money in that fund at current time, and if it's capable of paying off some of the outstanding balance, or is it not being considered in this current case at least?
Yeah, it is not being considered. The redemption fund is funded in anticipation of making principal and interest payments as they are due for the bonds that are outstanding. So there is a set mechanism for the payment, and that account is where the payment comes out of. So we're really just looking for the bonds that are economic right now, that lend themselves to savings. Certainly not the entirety of the series is in that category.
Sejus Masi for that. And then are there any anticipated costs and penalties for refunding the bonds? Just in general, perhaps, because this is changing things for a long time to come, but then also specifically since we're looking at Series C today.
No, there is not.
And in looking at the language, this was part of why I asked whether legal counsel had been involved, is whether the language is considered restrictive enough, tight enough, so that it is really limiting it to these refunding costs and the associated administrative and other costs, but it's not, I mean, if we're looking at opening up the door for not having legislative approval bond by bond, but we're now having a blanket approval, we want to make sure that the language is restrictive enough and we're not creating some sort of a gap or flexibility to do things other than address the just a portion of. So is it legal's opinion? Did you have that question, Mr. Hernandez, with the legal counsel of whether it just, it really efficiently restricts it to just the any portion of?
So the current statute allows for the refunding to occur, obviously, with all the bonds. That was authorized by the legislature back when this original bond was issued, and the refunding of it was issued as well. But I guess the intent of the bill really is to allow for portions of the bonds outstanding to be refunded. That's the request. And so if there's a portion sometime in the future that is within the parameters of the savings, 2% net present value savings in the future, then the bill essentially requests for that authorization for that period of time, sometime in the future, to refund any portion of those bonds that will have that minimum threshold of savings. So if sometime in the future a portion of the bonds become refundable, and it has to still fit within the parameters that the body will approves, and that is there has to be some type of savings for it.
Sutus Masi for that. So I may ask for just additional legal analysis just to make sure that there isn't a gap being created, but I did see the language that you're referring to. So we've had some discussion about the savings or lessened payments, and there being a threshold for that. So I think that is important. So is there assurance then in the way that this is limiting things that it is not impacting our government of Guam debt ceiling? Any of this restructuring or refunding?
These bonds don't count against the debt ceiling. The revenue bonds of the airport, the port, power authority, and the water authority are not counted against the debt ceiling.
Sutus Masi, we wanted to make sure that that was really clear, both for ourselves and others that are listening in. And then, again, just for clarity, it's written in the legislation, but to make it clear to everybody. So just in general, if the airport does not meet its bond obligations, who is responsible?
The airport solely. There will be no spillover effect to the general government. The bonds are secured 100% by revenues of the authority.
Again, that's a very good assurance and important to all of us as we're thinking about this movement. And part of what I wanted to mention was, you know, in the letter from Gita, it mentioned that this is having legislation that falls in line with some of the other autonomous agencies, but another important consideration, I think, is that not all autonomous agencies have this authority, I think, at this time, without legislative or with a blanket legislative approval. And so this is why it's important to have the committee of the whole and be able to look at this, because it potentially creates a precedence for some of the authorities that may not have this type of ability at this time. So I'm not sure how much time I have left. Don't count that against my time. But I reserve the right to come back to further questions.
All right, thank you, Senator. Let's move on now to Senator Will Castro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to thank the previous speakers for their questions, but just so that I'm clear, anyone on the panel can answer this. It was stated that there are three series, right? 2013, A, B, and C. Series A at 13 point something million, B at 33, C at 199. While the director of BBMR mentioned certainly not going to refi the entire package, my question is, if we pass this bill as written, does that possibility exist? And I recall, Ricky, your response, but I just want to hear it one more time. It's possible that you can, if each of these series are callable, that you can actually proceed without legislative concurrence.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so I also...
Within the parameters of the savings requirement.
Appreciate it. So that would leave me then with a follow-up question, that this is a discussion not then of 21 million, which is your original intent, but as the previous speaker alluded to, within the greater context, we're looking well over $246 million of possible refinancing. Okay. I do have a couple more questions, Mr. Chairman.
If I may?
Yeah, thank you.
With that, you wouldn't be able to refund the full amount of the bonds. And the reason why is because you wouldn't meet the 2% savings. So right now, if you were looking at more than 20 million, you wouldn't meet the 2%. And that's, that's required by law.
I appreciate that, Mr. Rios. So then my follow-up question is, why would we include all the series in it, and just come back to us when you're ready for the 2% on the rest of it? But don't answer that. That's just my point that I want to come back to. But I do appreciate that, John. I have a question for the panel. Mr. Topaz, I appreciate you itemizing what you intend to happen with the bond proceeds. And to the credit again of the first speaker, your itemization, if you could, I don't expect you to have the answer now, but I would hope the authority could provide me the numbers before I render my vote. So, for example, in my mind, the entire ask is predicated upon the possibility, not the possibility, the intent to use any projected savings for additional investments in CIP, and you named quite a few. What I would like to see from the authority is an itemized listing. For example, runway rehabilitation phases 1, phases 2, phase 1, phase 2. What would that CIP investment look like? Is it 2 million? Is it 6 million? And then going down, the apron rehabilitation phases was kind of elusive. Is that phases 2 or 5? Air cargo apron spots 1, 2, 3, etc. Your justification for that, by the way, is appreciated. The airport master plan update and a compatibility study. Now, again, to restate my ask, Mr. Chairman, concisely is I'd like to see the itemized breakdown of that, what the dollar amounts may be that may be required, and you'll see why I'm leaning into that. My follow-up would be also to the panel, to the authority, if I can get an update, not now, but at least sometime today before we vote on it, on the bill, would be an update on the airport master plan. So I understand the master plan is a 2013 master plan, and so I'd like to see how far we've progressed as a territory in meeting one or more of those objectives. So those would be my two asks. My follow-up would be also, Mr. Chairman, there was some mention with the former customs director, a member of this body was encouraging the airport to look inward at the Guam family and how this investment could benefit one or more agencies, and I appreciate that. I like that. It's making maximum use of the people's money. Although the authority may be somewhat autonomous, this is the people's asset, ultimately, and so I appreciate that perspective from Senator Talahi. I also want to encourage us to look outward at our regional partners, those who can also benefit, mutually benefit, particularly within the Marianas. And so my question is, if we make these investments, what is the cost or the impact to our air carriers? And I'm particularly concerned about those who service the region. Does it give an opportunity for us to realize some savings or reduce the cost of service or goods that are passed on to the airline? Do they have access to a better facility, that perhaps some exception may be made for the smaller carriers so that the cost of transportation, whether it's cargo or human passengers, could be reduced to facilitate that kind of knowledge transfer or trade of goods by and between the islands? And so that's probably my more important philosophical question as it relates to my vote and an investment in the future of the territory.
Answer that? Yeah. Thank you, Senator Castro. Absolutely. Any capital improvement projects that we proceed with at the airport is meant to increase our capacity while maintaining and ensuring the safety and security of the traveling public. Definitely in terms of the third floor project, it'll create additional capacity for the airport, but more importantly, it'll create the efficiencies necessary to be able to capture arriving passengers and funnel them through the FIS services. And then that'll allow us to open up the existing concourse to maximize our revenue generating potential. That'll help offset that'll help maximize the non-aeronautical revenue to offset the aeronautical revenues that we receive from our carriers, which by reducing the costs of operations for our air carriers, we hope to increase their activity into the island and thereby allowing more economic benefit to the island as a whole.
Thank you, Mr. Topaz. So you mentioned words like efficiency, savings, offset, and I'd like to leave you with this question, and then I'll reserve the balance of my time, Mr. Chairman, if any, for the first round to the second. I'd like the authority to consider and maybe have a follow-up conversation before I vote on the measure to help me ascertain whether or not some of these efficiencies and savings and or offsets may be applied to air carriers that are owned in whole or in part by the people of Guam and or the CNMI for the purposes of inter-island travel. So in a nutshell, if we were to make a significant investment, could there be an opportunity for us to facilitate a greater exchange by and between ourselves and our regional partners through some kind of an offset because we're going to realize savings? Now, I understand that we may not directly benefit from this. This might be an investment in the future, but I can tell you the exponential return on investment by far would offset any other type of cost that we can defray. So that's not necessarily a question, Mr. Chairman, but I'd like you to consider that. I'd like the authority to consider that in addition to my other questions that I've had. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. That concludes what I want to ask the panel for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Castro. Senator Moylan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I've been reviewing the United States Government Accountability Office. There's a report to congressional committees dated June 2019. It regards the Territories and Public Debt Outlook 2019 update. So it's a pretty good report, and it just talks about Guam and its public debt, which based on this report increased by 6% between fiscal years 2015 and 17, mostly due to refinancing and infrastructure projects. So I understand our airport with the infrastructure and the projects that we're planning to do are greatly important, especially if we're increasing the amount of flights coming to our island because that's bringing in our revenue. But as I read this report, it tells me that the composition of Guam's public debt, based on fiscal year 2017, our debt total was $2.6 billion. And of that, our Guam Airport Authority constitutes 8.7% of that. And with this 2017 fiscal year report, that was $226.6 million in debt. So the report is really stating out that since fiscal year 2015, the major driver of new public debt by our government of Guam have been refinancing existing debt. It would be so good if we didn't have to do that, but of course we're doing it for the right reasons. But I just want to implore that, eventually I think our airport will be at a running state where we can just have to do regular maintenance instead of these big borrowings and debts and so forth, and one day it would look so great. But I just want to ask is, if you can help assure me that there's going to be a master plan to reduce this debt, and there's light at the end of the tunnel. That's all I'm asking. And it's not going to be easy, of course, but of course with your plans, that maybe there is light at the end of the tunnel. So I'm just throwing that out there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So thank you, Senator Moylan. With regards to the projects that we're pursuing, first of all, let me just state that the airport is very active and proactive in terms of preventive maintenance at the airport. What's happening now with some of the concrete and things with our infrastructure is, rather than going in and do piecemeal repairs, we like to go in and do one solid repair for all these particular areas to extend the life of the pavement there and allow us to ensure that our operators at the airport are operating on safe pavement that will reduce any impacts to their aircraft. And so, the projects that we're proceeding with you'll always see every 5 years or so, we're going to come back and we're going to look at repairing our aprons. We're going to look at repairing our runway because the natural course of operations will have an impact, just like it does on our roads. We'll have nice, beautiful roads once it's constructed, but over the years they'll deteriorate because of the wear and tear by the use of our island vehicles. So it's the same thing with the airport infrastructure. What this does for us is that as part of the national priority of airport systems for the FAA, every year the FAA is always looking to ensure that we're operating safely and securely as well as efficiently. And so they'll always have discretionary funding to allow airports that aren't the large hubs to be able to access those funds to continue with the preventive maintenance programs, which includes taking a look at all their airport pavement and things of that nature. So.
Senator Moylan, any further questions?
No, thank you. But the common maintenance, that's wonderful. If you can extend that to Marine Drive, that will be even more helpful. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator Moylan. Senator Pt.1, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, our credit rating right now is actually promising, right? So let's just anticipate that the 5% goes down to 4%. Would that credit rating going down 1% would it have an impact on the bond borrowing?
Sir, are you making a reference to the BPT?
I'm talking about, the BPT.
Yeah. The revenues of the airport are not predicated on the business privilege.
So it wouldn't have an impact?
No,
it wouldn't
sir.
have a negative impact? You know, I just want to address this to the Deputy Director of the airport. You know, we were trying to iron out the service charges for custom, because there's this one area at the airport that custom doesn't use, and they're paying like $850,000 a year. Has there been any conversation between the airport and custom to just waive that area because they're not using it? Has there been a decision made to either custom, because custom have been charging $8 for services, and you know, going down to the financial obligation at the airport, we figured maybe we might move it up to $11 or even up to $20. It's unrealistic if we go up to $20. They're going to zap us on that. But is there any conversation to waive that area for custom?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. Yes, there's definitely conversations, and we've been working this consistently week to week with the governor's office and stuff. Not to waive the fee, but to take away the the portion that is not being used. It's called the walk and talk area. So we're looking at customs giving up that space and not being charged for that lease, not charged for that space. So we're looking at that for this upcoming fiscal year. And so we've given those figures with the governor's office, and of course they're going to be working with your office in as far as the fees. In looking at it, in taking those fees away, and then of course looking at the rates that it's going to be charged, we're, instead of 800,000 savings, I think it's only going to be $600,000 in savings that we would give the Customs and Quarantine Agency.
Thank you. I just want to go back to because we're trying, the bond borrowing is up to 200 million, or am I right? The bond borrowing for this time around is 200 million? And in order for, the only reason why we are going beyond the 200 million is because of the 2% savings that we're going to have? Is that right?
So the intent of the airport as it relates to this bond is to just refund existing bonds. So just to be clear, there's no new money being
so let me
borrowed.
understand this. The 200 million that we're trying to get from the bond borrowing is to pay off the outstanding bond commitment that we have to pay and capital improvement. That's about it, right?
Yeah, so you're correct that we're trying to borrow funds to repay a prior bond, but I believe the intent is to refund only the portion that is callable, which means the portion that we can.
But you won't realize the 2% savings if we don't go up before over 200 million.
No, I think we based on our discussions with our underwriters, they expect that we will be able to get the 2% net present value savings for about approximately 21
even
million.
if it goes below the 200 million?
Yeah, it's 21 million, not 200.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Thank you very much.
21.
Thank you, Senator Talahi. Any further questions? Senator Taidegui?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I'll reserve my comments to the second round. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Mary Torres. Vice Speaker, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perhaps to Gita, will this extend the length of the bond, this refund?
Depending on the option that the airport decides, and I think it's to restructure, based on discussions with our underwriters, there's a possibility that it would extend the maturity date for the callable bonds that are being refunded out about a year and a half.
So it only extended for an additional year or year and a half?
Yeah.
And the overall savings would still be?
The savings is estimated, if market conditions remain as expected, to be a 2% net present value savings.
2%. 2% of the 21 million. Okay. So we've been bringing up the issue with customs, right, and having them pay over $2 million in rent. Perhaps a question that I have is, to understand this better, when any government agency goes out and gets a bond, there are certain agreements that come with this bond. And so my question is the Guam International Airport Authority, they own property, right? They own a lot of property in Tizon. At the airport is another property. A couple years back, they extended the property real estate just by that Guam sign when you enter up to the airport from Marine Drive. So how much property of the Guam International Airport Authority is tied to these bonds? Is it all of the property of GIAA or just a portion of the property that GIAA owns that's tied to these bonds? Series A, B, and C.
Thank you, Senator. So the airport owns approximately 1,800 acres of property located up at where our current location is at. The airport tries to maximize its revenue generating potential by looking and making use of all of the land surrounding the airport. One, to generate revenue, but most importantly, to ensure compatible land use with airport activities. There's some huge tracts of property towards,
Excuse me, I can't see you.
as you come in from Cars Plus, that's part of our runway protection zone.
Senator Tidegui, you're in the way. Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry, ma'am. So as you enter the Cars Plus traffic light, where Cars Plus is located, that whole area is cleared out because that consists of that comprises our runway protection zone as the aircraft approach the airport. And so we try not to, or we're not allowed to put anything, permanent buildings in the RPZ. Further out to the RPZ, we're able to put a couple of buildings, and it's there. We're supposed to maximize whatever revenue generating potential we have at the airport so that we can use and offset whatever non-aeronautical revenue we can generate, helps offset the aeronautical revenue that we rely on from our air carriers. That reduces their operating costs. That ensures that they continue to look at Guam as a feasible origin destination market for them, and that allows them to continue to bring in their aircraft and hopefully increase their services as well.
Okay. So you said 1,800 acres.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you have property in Tizan? It seems like there are abandoned buildings in the back end. Does Guam International Airport own any of that property there?
Where exactly, ma'am, are you talking about? On the south side or on the north side?
Right before the hangars. Right before you get to the hangars, they're like where the old GPD army used to be.
Yeah. So if you're looking, so most of the airport property is all fenced in. Mm-hmm. So if you were to look at it, with the exception of four former barracks facilities located near the soccer fields where Teton High School is at,
right.
The four barracks facilities towards the end are the only ones that aren't fenced in as part of the airport property because they're located on the south side of Mariner Avenue. But all the other properties that belong to the airport, you'll see there's a perimeter fence that goes around it. And then inside of that perimeter fence, there's an airport operations fence that secures the AOA operations. So the perimeter fence allows other non-airport related activities to be able to use those properties or have access to those properties. The abandoned buildings that you see on the south side, those are actually going to be cleared and demolished, and we have a grant from the FAA to help us proceed with those projects as well.
So right now, those barracks facilities are vacant?
No. Those barracks facilities are being used by GPD, ma'am. But what I'm saying is...
In the future?
I'm sorry?
In the future, you're going to...
If GPD relocates to another location, then we'll find another suitable use for those barracks facilities.
So does GPD also pay rent for those facilities?
Yes, ma'am.
What is the cost of that rent for GPD?
Yeah. Good. Yeah, it's like $40,000 a month. We don't have the answer.
I think, man, we got to get back to you on the correct detail or correct per square footage, but it's definitely lower than
Commercial properties.
Yeah. So we have to get back to you on that exact cost.
But
Okay.
I believe it's about 26,000 they pay a month.
A month?
For the,
26,000 a month. Okay. For all four? All four? buildings, $26,000 a month, not each.
Not each.
So the combination, okay. Okay, and so all of these properties are tied into some conditions of the bond.
Any revenue that we generate off these properties is dedicated to airport operations, to pay back our debt service, as well as to stay in line with our FAA grant assurances.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Vice Speaker. Senator Joseph Augustine? Questions? All right, ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of the first round of questions. We'll add it to the... That is the end of the first round of questions. Excuse me.
Mr. Chair? No, I was just asking if we can take a break now and come back at 2 o'clock while we incorporate all that was said here
Oh, yes,
for the
yes.
second round?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, we are not done with exhausting the items on the committee of the whole, so I believe that we are on the second round, and
Yes.
so we can move forward
Yes, Vice
because
Chair.
we still have a long calendar, and next week is budget, and so let's
Thank you,
push to
Vice
see
Speaker.
what we can do to move.
We
Thank you,
will,
Mr. Chair.
we will go ahead and recess and come back at 2 p.m. to continue round 2 of the Committee of the Whole.
Mr.
Thank
Chair, I
you.
need
Thank
to
you, Mr.
amend
Chair.
that to 3 p.m. We have something scheduled at 2. Speaker?
Okay, we will come back, we will recess and come back at 3 p.m.
Thank you.